Returning from chemo with my daughter and her husband, we drove past a Porsche dealership. He looked at it and said, "That's my dream car," without hesitation. My daughter pulled my credit card from her purse and said, "Use mom's card. She has 500,000 saved up and won't live long enough to spend it anyway." 3 days later, they were both in jail and I was behind the wheel of a Porsche. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This story gets wild and you're going to want to hear how it ends. The drive home that day should have been a celebration. Sarah's husband, Marcus, was unusually cheerful behind the wheel, chatting about weekend plans and summer vacations like my future was suddenly guaranteed again. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of downtown Phoenix roll by, feeling lighter than I had in almost a year. Then we passed Henderson's luxury cars, and everything changed. "Stop the car," Marcus said suddenly, his voice thick with desire. There, gleaming under the Arizona sun like a silver jewel, sat a Porsche 911. "That's it," he said. "That's my dream car. I've wanted one since I was 16, before either Sarah or I could object." He pulled into the lot and parked right in front of it, like he was afraid it might vanish. Sarah rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Marcus, we're not buying a Porsche today. Mom just finished chemo, for heaven's sake." But Marcus was already out of the car, circling the Porsche like a predator sizing up prey. A salesman appeared almost instantly, smiling the kind of smile that smells money. "Beautiful car, isn't she?" he said, shaking Marcus's hand. "Just came in yesterday. 2023 model. Only 8,000 miles. Previous owner was a collector who barely drove it." Marcus's eyes lit up as he ran his fingers along the hood. "What's the asking price?" "78,000, the salesman replied smoothly. "But for the right buyer, we might have some flexibility." Sarah and I exchanged glances. Marcus earned a good salary as an engineer, but 78,000 was more than his annual pay. Still, the way he was looking at that car, it was like watching a man fall in love. "We should go," Sarah said gently. "Mom needs to rest." But I was watching Marcus's face, seeing something I'd never seen before: pure, unfiltered desire. In the 3 years since their wedding, I'd grown genuinely fond of my son-in-law. He'd been around even longer, 2 years of dating before the marriage, and he'd always seemed kind, supportive, and hardworking. He treated Sarah well and had been incredibly helpful during my cancer treatments. If anyone deserved a dream, it was him. And that's when Sarah did something that stopped my heart, without hesitation, without asking, without even pausing. She reached into my purse, pulled out my credit card, and handed it to Marcus. "Use mom's card," she said casually, as if she were lending him a pen. "She's got over 500,000 saved, and honestly, she won't live long enough to spend it anyway." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. The casual cruelty, the assumption that my death was a matter of when, not if. The realization that she'd clearly discussed my finances with her husband, probably in detail. I sat frozen in the back seat, watching my daughter hand over my own money while my son-in-law's eyes gleamed with greed I'd never noticed before. Marcus didn't even hesitate. He took the card, eager, while the salesman pulled out the paperwork, sensing an easy sale. "We can have this processed within the hour," he said, practically salivating. "Just need to run the card and transfer the title." I should have spoken up. I should have snatched my card back and demanded an explanation. But I was still foggy from chemo, still processing the sting of my daughter's words. So I sat there in silence as they used my money to buy a car I'd never even be allowed to drive, celebrating my survival by planning for my death. The paperwork took exactly 47 minutes. I know, because I watched every second tick by on the dealership's wall clock. My mind slowly cleared as the reality sank in. By the time Marcus slid behind the wheel of his new Porsche, I had already made a decision, one that would change everything. 3 days later, I was sitting in my own silver Porsche 911, watching through the dealership window as my daughter and son-in-law were led away in handcuffs. But that's getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand how a 68-year-old cancer survivor went from victim to victor. In less than 72 hours, the ride home from the dealership was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Marcus drove his new Porsche ahead of us while Sarah followed in our car, chattering excitedly about how handsome her husband looked behind the wheel. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands folded tightly in my lap, saying nothing. The silence must have looked like fatigue to Sarah because she kept glancing at me with concern. "Are you feeling okay, Mom? Maybe we should have gone straight home instead of stopping." Her voice was gentle, caring, even the same soothing tone she'd used throughout my treatments. Somehow, that made it worse. Pretending to care again right after what she'd said at the dealership. "I'm fine," I managed, though I was anything but. My mind was racing, replaying her words over and over. "She won't live long enough to spend it anyway." I couldn't stop thinking about it, the financial discussions they'd obviously had about me. The way Marcus had taken my card without hesitation. As if this had all been planned. When we pulled into my driveway, Marcus was already out of the Porsche, running his hands over every surface like a teenager with his first car. Helen, he called out, using the name he'd called me since the wedding. Come see how smooth this interior is. This leather's like butter. His enthusiasm was infectious, almost innocent, and for a moment I wondered if maybe I was overreacting. But then I caught the glance he and Sarah shared, a quick look that said they'd gotten away with something. Sarah's shoulders had relaxed in a way that told me she'd been nervous about how I'd react. They'd gambled on my gratitude for their support during treatment, my exhaustion from chemo, my natural tendency to avoid confrontation, and they'd calculated correctly until now. You know what? I said, forcing a smile. I think I'd like to take a nap. The treatment always makes me tired. Sarah immediately shifted into caregiver mode, helping me up the front steps and fussing over whether I'd eaten enough lunch. Should I make you some soup? Or maybe that ginger tea Dr. Morrison recommended? I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. I let her tuck me into bed like I was a child, accepting her kisses on my forehead and her promises to check on me in a few hours. Through my bedroom window, I could hear Marcus starting the Porsche's engine again and again, revving it like a motorcycle. The sound made my teeth ache. Once they left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for exactly 10 minutes. Then I got up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. If Sarah and Marcus wanted to discuss my finances, they were about to learn exactly how much money I really had and, more importantly, how a woman doesn't survive 68 years, raise two children, and beat cancer by being naive about people's motives. My first call was to Patricia Williams, my financial advisor at Phoenix National Bank. Patricia had been managing my investments since my husband David died 6 years ago, turning his modest life insurance policy and our savings into something substantial. Through careful planning and smart decisions, she answered on the second ring. Helen, how did the treatment go today? Patricia's voice was warm with genuine concern. Unlike my daughter, she knew my survival odds were actually quite good. Stage 2 breast cancer with an excellent prognosis, especially given my health and the aggressive treatment plan. Treatment went fine, Patricia, I said, but I need to discuss something urgent about my accounts. I told her everything, what had happened at the dealership, every awful detail. Patricia's silence stretched longer and longer as I spoke. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. Double quotes, Helen, I have to ask, did you authorize this purchase? Her professional tone had kicked in and I could practically hear her taking notes. Absolutely not, I said firmly. And I need to know exactly how much they charged to my card. Plus, I want to understand all my options. Patricia put me on hold while she accessed my accounts. When she came back, her voice was grim. The charge was processed for $78,000, plus taxes and fees. Total damage, $84,247. She paused. Helen, this is a significant amount. If you didn't authorize it, I want to report it as fraud, I said clearly. And I want to understand exactly what that means for Sarah and Marcus. Patricia walked me through the process. Since the purchase was over $50,000 and made without my authorization, it would automatically trigger a federal investigation. The dealership would be required to cooperate, providing security footage and documentation. If the FBI determined that the purchase was fraudulent, Sarah and Marcus could face charges for felony fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The penalties could include significant jail time, Patricia warned. Are you sure you want to go down this road? It's your daughter we're talking about. That question hung in the air between us. Was I sure? Was I really ready to send my only daughter to prison over a car? I thought about her words at the dealership, her casual dismissal of my survival, the way she discussed my money with her husband as if I were already dead, the calculation in her eyes when she handed over my card. Patricia, I said quietly, they're counting on me being too weak or too grateful to fight back. I took a deep breath. They're wrong. Then we move forward, she said firmly. I'll start the fraud report immediately and freeze the card to prevent any additional charges. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope this time, but power. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't the victim of circumstance. My second call was to Detective Ramon Santos at the Phoenix Police Department. Ramon had been David's partner for 12 years before David retired, and he'd stayed in touch with our family ever since. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate and sharp. Helen, this is serious stuff. Even if it's family, fraud is fraud. He paused before continuing. Though I have to warn you, once this investigation starts, you can't just change your mind if things get uncomfortable. I assured him I understood exactly what that meant. Ramon promised to coordinate with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and advised me to document everything the timeline. The conversations, any evidence of premeditation that evening. Sarah called to check on me. How are you feeling, Mom? You seemed tired earlier. Her voice was sweet, concerned. Perfectly normal, as if the entire afternoon at the dealership had never happened. I'm feeling much better, I said truthfully. In fact, I'm feeling stronger than I have in months. We chatted about dinner plans for the weekend. About Marcus's excitement over his new car. About my upcoming follow-up appointment with Dr. Morrison. A normal mother-daughter conversation, completely surreal. Given what I'd already set in motion after we hung up, I sat on my back patio with a cup of tea, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In 48 hours, the investigation would be complete. Security footage would confirm that I never consented to the purchase. Bank records would show the unauthorized use of my card. And my daughter and son-in-law would learn that underestimating a cancer survivor was the biggest mistake of their lives. But I wasn't done yet, because if they thought $78,000 was worth betraying me for, they had no idea what I was actually worth. The next morning, I woke before dawn feeling more energetic than I had in months. Maybe it was the knowledge that my treatment was finally over. Or maybe it was the clarity that comes from making a difficult but necessary decision. Either way, I had work to do. My first stop was Henderson's Luxury Cars, where I arrived just as they opened at 9. The same salesman who'd handled Marcus's purchase yesterday greeted me with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for customers who don't ask about financing. Mrs. Winters, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today? I'm interested in looking at sports cars, I said, letting my gaze wander across the showroom. Something with character. Something that makes a statement. The salesman, his nameplate read Jim Morrison, no relation to the singer. As he told me yesterday, lit up like Christmas morning. We have several excellent options, he said eagerly. What kind of statement are you looking to make? I smiled, thinking of Sarah and Marcus, probably still asleep at home, dreaming about their new toy, the kind that says I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Jim showed me 3 different cars, but I kept coming back to one in particular, a silver Porsche 911, identical to the one Marcus had bought with my money. The only difference was that this one was a 2024 model with just 300 miles on it. How much? I asked, running my fingers along the hood, just as Marcus had done the day before. This one's $82,000, Jim said. But it's worth every penny. Top of the line features. Barely driven. I pulled out my checkbook, the same account Sarah and Marcus had violated, and wrote a check for the full amount. Jim's eyes widened as he realized it was a cash sale. Mrs. Winters, I have to say, it's unusual to see someone pay cash for a vehicle like this. I handed him the check with a smile. At my age, you learn not to put off the things that make you happy. An hour later, I was driving my new Porsche home, the desert wind whipping through my hair as I took the long way through Scottsdale. The car handled like a dream, responsive and powerful in a way that made me feel 20 years younger. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Sarah's car was already there. She was sitting on my front porch, her face etched with worry. Mom, where were you? I've been calling for an hour. She stood up as I got out of the Porsche, her eyes widening as she took in the car, my wind-blown hair, and the unmistakable glow of someone who'd just spent a lot of money. I went shopping, I said simply. I decided if Marcus could have a new car, so could I. Sarah's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish out of water. Mommy, you bought a Porsche? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I did. Do you like it? I asked, patting the hood affectionately. It's exactly like Marcus's except newer. Sarah looked like she might faint. Mom, how much did this cost? The concern in her voice wasn't maternal anymore, it was financial panic. $82,000. I said cheerfully. But don't worry. According to you, I have plenty of money and I won't live long enough to spend it anyway. Sarah's face went white. Mom, I didn't mean yesterday. I was just what? I cut in softly. Just assuming I was too weak to notice? Too grateful for your help to question your decisions? I unlocked my front door and walked inside, leaving her to follow. We need to talk. In the living room, Sarah perched on the edge of the sofa like she was ready to bolt. Mom, about yesterday, she started. I think there was a misunderstanding. I settled into my favorite chair, the one David had bought me for my 60th birthday, and studied her face. What kind of misunderstanding, sweetheart? Well, she began hesitantly. When I gave Marcus your card, I was just, we've been talking about how grateful we are for everything you've done for us during your treatment. And Marcus has been working so hard and he's been so worried about you. And when I saw how much he wanted that car, she was babbling now, her carefully rehearsed justification falling apart under the weight of her own guilt. So, I said evenly, you decided to spend my money as a thank you gift to your husband? Without asking me first? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I knew you'd say yes if I asked. You always do. You're so generous, Mom, sometimes too generous for your own good. That phrase too generous for your own good hit me like a revelation. How many times had I heard it over the years? From Sarah when I donated to charity. From Marcus when I helped their friends with moving expenses. From neighbors when I bought Girl Scout cookies I didn't want. I'd always taken it as a compliment. But now, hearing it again, I realized it wasn't one, it was an accusation. A judgment. Proof that they'd been talking about me behind my back, labeling my kindness as weakness. And the comment, I asked quietly, about me not living long enough to spend my money. Sarah's face crumpled. Mom, the doctor said your prognosis was good, but cancer is. It's unpredictable. Marcus and I have been talking about what would happen if the treatment didn't work. We just want to make sure you enjoy life while you can. By spending my money on things I'll never use? I asked. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. By making sure the people we love get to experience happiness. The car makes Marcus so happy, Mom, you should see how he lights up when he talks about it. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at my new Porsche gleaming in the afternoon sun. And my happiness? I asked quietly. My right to make my own financial decisions? How do those factor into your calculations? The silence stretched between us, long and heavy. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice small and defeated. We messed up. I see that now. But Mom, we can fix this. Marcus can return the car, and we can pretend yesterday never happened. I turned back to face her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years, my beautiful, capable daughter, who'd somehow learned to see her mother as a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. Sarah, I said softly, some things can't be taken back. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Her eyes widened. What are you saying? I walked over and sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in mine. I'm saying that yesterday, when you handed Marcus my credit card, you made a choice. You chose to see me as someone whose money mattered more than whose consent mattered. I squeezed her hands gently. And today, I'm making a choice, too. Just then, Sarah's phone rang, interrupting the moment. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. It's Marcus, she whispered. Mom, please, whatever you're planning, I said softly, squeezing her hands. Answer it, sweetheart. But remember, some conversations can't be unheard. Just like some actions can't be undone. As Sarah lifted the phone to her ear, I could already hear Marcus's voice from across the room, high-pitched, panicked, unmistakably terrified. The investigation was moving faster than I'd expected. In just a few hours, they'd both understand exactly how expensive their so-called gratitude had been. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen as she listened. Even from where I sat, I caught fragments of Marcus's frantic words, FBI agents, fraud investigation. They took the car. When she finally hung up, her hands were trembling. Mom, what did you do? She whispered. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, needing something to do with my hands. Making tea had always calmed me, and right now, I needed all the calm I could get. I reported the unauthorized use of my credit card, I said, filling the kettle with water. It's what any responsible person does when someone steals from them. Sarah followed me, her movements jerky with fear. Steals? Mom, I'm your daughter. We're family. Family doesn't steal, family asks permission, I said quietly, keeping my back to her as I went through the familiar ritual. Earl Grey, to sugars, a splash of milk, the same way I'd been making it for 40 years. Family respects boundaries. Family doesn't assume you're too weak or too dead to make your own choices. I could hear her crying behind me. Soft, broken sobs that once would have made me drop everything to comfort her. But today, they just sounded like the tears of someone who was finally facing the consequences of their actions. Marcus is at the police station, she said shakily. They're questioning him about fraud. Federal fraud? Mom, do you even know what that means? I turned, leaning against the counter, studying her tear-streaked face. It means the government takes stealing seriously, I said evenly. Even when it's done by family. The kettle began to whistle. I poured hot water over the tea bags, watching as the clear liquid turned slowly amber. It means there are consequences, I added, for treating people like a team is. But you gave me access to that account years ago for emergencies, Sarah said desperately, clinging to any thread that might save her. I nodded. I did. For medical bills, home repairs, real crises. I looked her straight in the eye. Was Marcus wanting a Porsche an emergency? Her silence was answer enough. When I'd given her access to my accounts, it was right after David's death, when I was drowning in grief and so grateful for her help managing the finances. I'd never imagined she'd use that access to fund her husband's wish list. Mom, please. Sarah's voice cracked. You can stop this. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you gave permission after all. I poured the tea into 2 cups, adding sugar and milk to both. Even in the middle of a family crisis, some habits refuse to die. Drink your tea, I said, handing her a cup. We need to talk about some things you don't know. Sarah wrapped her shaking hands around the warm cup like it was the only solid thing left in her world. What things? She asked. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd spent countless evenings, talking through homework, heartbreaks, college plans, wedding details. But this conversation was nothing like those. Did you know, I began, that when your father died, he left me more than just the life insurance policy? She frowned. What do you mean? The insurance was $100,000 and you had your savings, I smiled, remembering David's quiet pride in his careful planning. Your father was much more responsible with money than anyone realized. He had investments, pension benefits, real estate holdings he never talked about. He was old-fashioned that way, thought money talk was ungentlemanly. Sarah's cup clinked against her saucer as she set it down with unsteady hands. How much more? She whispered. Enough that the $84,000 you and Marcus spent yesterday represents about 2% of my total assets, I said calmly. I'm not poor, Sarah, I'm not desperate. And I'm certainly not dying anytime soon. The color drained completely from her face. 2%, I nodded. Dr. Morrison gave me a 93% 5-year survival rate. My oncologist expects me to live another 20 to 25 years. Plenty of time to spend my money on things I actually want. Sarah stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. But you live so modestly. You drive that old Honda, you shop at discount stores. You never. I learned from your father that living below your means is how you stay comfortable, I said. Just because I have money doesn't mean I need to flaunt it. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the truth settle between us. Unlike some people, I added softly, who think a windfall is permission to buy toys. Before she could respond, my phone rang. The tension in the room tightened like a wire as I saw the caller ID flash across the screen. Detective Santos, excuse me, I said. Picking up the call, Helen, came Raymond's voice, brisk and no nonsense. We've got Marcus here for questioning. The federal agents want to know if you're willing to come in and give a formal statement. Detective Santos said, of course, I replied, watching Sarah's face crumble as she realized the investigation was moving forward. Should I come now? That would be helpful, Ramon said. Then his voice shifted slightly. And Helen, you should know. Your son-in-law is claiming his wife told him you'd given permission for the purchase. The agents will want to ask you about that specifically. When I hung up, Sarah was staring at me with a mixture of fear and something that looked almost like respect. You're really going to testify against us? She asked quietly. I finished my tea and stood up. I'm going to tell the truth, Sarah, that I never gave permission for the purchase, and that you and Marcus took my card without authorization. The rest is up to the investigators. She began to cry again, harder this time. Mom, please. Marcus could go to prison. I could go to prison. We're talking about our lives here. I paused in the kitchen doorway, looking back at her. At 32, she was still beautiful, still capable of breaking hearts with her tears. But she was also old enough to know better. You should have thought about that before you decided my money was yours to spend, I said gently. Actions have consequences, sweetheart. It's a lesson I should have taught you better when you were younger. As I gathered my purse and keys, Sarah followed me to the front door. What happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. I looked past her, out at my silver Porsche gleaming in the sunlight, then back at her tear-streaked face. Now, I said quietly, you and Marcus learn what it costs to underestimate a cancer survivor who's tired of being everyone's piggy bank. The drive to the police station was surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt completely in control, like I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. Sarah and Marcus had made their choice at that dealership. Now, I was making mine, but first, I had one more stop to make. There was still something they didn't know about their perfect crime, and it was going to change everything. The Phoenix Federal Building was more intimidating than I'd expected, all glass and steel, rising toward the desert sky like a monument to justice. Detective Santos met me in the lobby, his familiar face a small comfort in the sterile government space. Helen, he said as we waited for the elevator. You look remarkably calm for someone about to put her own daughter in federal custody. I adjusted the strap of my purse, feeling the weight of the documents I'd brought. Maybe that's because I know something they don't. The FBI agent Sarah Richardson and Michael Chen were professional but intense. Agent Richardson, a woman about my daughter's age with sharp, steel-gray eyes, led the questioning while Agent Chen took notes. Mrs. Winters, Richardson began. Can you walk us through exactly what happened at Henderson's luxury cars yesterday? I recounted everything in detail, the stop at the dealership, Marcus's excitement over the Porsche, Sarah's casual comments about my money, and her unauthorized use of my credit card, Agent Richardson's face stayed neutral. But I caught Agent Chen exchange a quick glance with Detective Santos when I mentioned the $500,000. Did you at any point give verbal permission for this purchase? Richardson asked. No, I said. I was in shock. I just finished my final chemotherapy treatment, and my daughter was discussing my death and my finances like I wasn't even there. Agent Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Winters, your daughter claims she had prior authorization to use your accounts for family expenses. I opened my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. She did have emergency access, I said, which is why I brought these. I spread the documents across the conference table, bank statements from the past 3 years. Every questionable transaction carefully highlighted and annotated. Emergency dental work for her husband, $4,200. Emergency vacation to Hawaii, $8,500. Emergency kitchen renovation, $15,000. I looked up at Agent Richardson. Apparently, everything in their lives qualifies as an emergency except asking my permission first. Detective Santos let out a low whistle. Helen, how much are we talking about total? I'd spent 2 hours that morning with my calculator and records, going line by line. Over the past 3 years, I said evenly. Sarah has withdrawn a total of $127,000 from my accounts. The Porsche purchase was just the largest single transaction. Agent Chen's pen froze mid-note. Mrs. Winters, are you saying this pattern of unauthorized access has been going on for years? I nodded. I've been documenting everything. But I kept making excuses. She was helping me after David's death. She was supporting me through cancer treatment. She was family. I convinced myself that family meant sharing everything. Agent Richardson studied the papers in silence. Then she looked up, her tone measured but firm. This goes beyond simple fraud, she said. We're looking at a pattern of financial exploitation spanning multiple years. She met my eyes. Mrs. Winters, I have to ask. Are you prepared for the full scope of charges this evidence could support? That was the question I'd been both dreading and waiting for all morning. Agent Richardson, I asked quietly, how much trouble are Sarah and Marcus actually facing? She flipped through her notes. Based on the single credit card incident alone, we're looking at federal fraud charges potentially 5 to 10 years. But with the full pattern of financial exploitation you've documented, she hesitated. We could be talking about significantly more time. The weight of what I'd set in motion settled over me like a heavy blanket. And if I choose not to pursue the additional charges, I asked carefully, if I limit this to just the Porsche incident? Agent Chen shook his head. You can't choose which federal crimes to prosecute. Mrs. Winters, once we have evidence of criminal activity, the decision to proceed belongs to the federal prosecutor, not to you. The room went silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning. I thought about Sarah sitting in my kitchen that morning, crying over tea and asking what would happen next. She'd had no idea that her unauthorized access to my accounts over the years had left a paper trail strong enough to put her in prison for decades. Mrs. Winters, Agent Richardson said gently, there is one factor that could significantly impact the charges and sentencing. I looked up, hopeful. What factor? Cooperation and restitution. If your daughter and her husband cooperate fully with the investigation and repay all unauthorized transactions, that could influence how the prosecutor handles the case. Complete restitution would be $127,000. Agent Chen added, plus interest, penalties, and court costs. Richardson said, we're probably looking at about $150,000 total. That number hung heavy in the air. I knew exactly how much Sarah and Marcus had in their accounts. Sarah had been complaining about their finances for months. They might have $20,000 in savings. I said quietly, if they don't have that kind of money, then they'll have to figure out how to get it. Richardson replied firmly, liquidate assets, secure loans, sell property. The court won't be sympathetic to defendants who spent money they couldn't afford to repay. When I left the federal building, Detective Santos walked me to my car. Helen, he asked softly, are you okay with how serious this has become? I paused, looking back at the building where my daughter and son-in-law were probably being processed for federal crimes. Raoni, I said. For 3 years I've been the family ATM. I watched them spend my money on luxuries while I shopped at thrift stores and worried about being a burden. Yesterday at that dealership, I realized they weren't just taking my money, they were taking my dignity. I unlocked my Porsche. The car still felt strange and wonderful after only 1 day of ownership. Now, I said quietly, they're going to learn that every choice has a price, and some lessons are more expensive than others. As I drove home, I thought about the phone call I'd need to make. Sarah and Marcus would be released on their own reconnaissance within a few hours. They'd need someone to explain just how deep the hole they dug really was. They thought they'd been cleverly managing my finances for years. Instead, they'd been documenting their own crimes one transaction at a time. The irony was almost poetic. In trying to spend my money before I died, they'd created the evidence that might cost them decades of their own lives. But I wasn't done with them yet. There was still one more surprise waiting, one final lesson about what happens when you underestimate a woman who's spent 68 years learning how to survive. When I pulled into the driveway, Sarah and Marcus were waiting on my front porch. They both looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. Marcus's face was pale and drawn, his usual swagger replaced by the hollow-eyed look of a man who'd just watched his future disappear. Sarah's tears had dried, leaving her makeup streaked and her expression eerily calm. "Mom," Sarah said softly as I walked up the steps. "We need to talk." I unlocked the front door and gestured for them to follow me inside. "I imagine you do." In the living room, they sat side by side on the sofa, holding hands like survivors of a shipwreck. Marcus spoke first, his voice hoarse from hours of interrogation. "Helen, I need you to know I never meant for this to turn into what it has. When Sarah gave me your card yesterday, I honestly thought you'd given permission." I sat down across from them, studying their faces. "And when she told you I had $500,000 and wouldn't live long enough to spend it, what did you think then?" Marcus winced. "I thought she was being dramatic. You know how Sarah gets when she's emotional." Sarah shot Marcus a sharp look. "Don't put this on me, Marcus. You were practically drooling over that car before I even mentioned Mom's money. So now you're turning on each other," I said quietly. Interesting how quickly family loyalty disappears when consequences arrive. They both looked stricken, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. "Almost. The FBI agents explained what you're facing." I continued. "Federal fraud charges, possibly conspiracy, and definitely financial exploitation of an elderly person." "Mom, please." Sarah's voice broke again. "We know we messed up, but there has to be something we can do. Some way to fix this." I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely calm despite the storm surrounding us. "There is one way, according to the agents: complete restitution, plus full cooperation with their investigation." Marcus straightened in his seat. "How much restitution?" I reached for the folder of bank statements I'd already shown the FBI. $127,000 that you've taken over the past 3 years, plus interest and penalties. They estimate about $150,000 total. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have that kind of money." I nodded sympathetically. "I know, your mortgage is $2,400 a month. Your car payments are $800, your credit cards are nearly maxed out, and your savings account has about $18,000 in it." Sarah stared at me, stunned. "How do you know our exact finances?" I smiled faintly. "Sarah, sweetheart, you've been complaining about money for 3 years. You've told me every detail of your financial struggles, usually right before asking me for help." I opened the folder wider, showing them the highlighted sections of their unauthorized withdrawals. Emergency dental work, emergency vacation, emergency furniture, emergency car repairs. Funny how every emergency lined up perfectly with something you wanted but couldn't afford. Marcus was reading over the documents now, his face growing paler with every page. "Jesus," he muttered. "I didn't realize how often we'd stolen from me?" I finished gently. "The word you're looking for is stolen, Marcus." Sarah started crying again, but this time quietly, like she'd finally run out of energy for the performance. "Mom," she whispered, "what are we going to do? We could go to prison for years. Our lives are ruined." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at my silver Porsche gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Your lives aren't ruined, Sarah, they're just more complicated now." Turning back to face them, I said evenly, "And I'm going to help you because that's what mothers do." Both of them looked up, a flicker of hope in their eyes. "You'll tell the FBI it was all a misunderstanding?" Marcus asked quickly. I shook my head. "No, Marcus. I'm going to tell them the truth. But I am going to help you raise the restitution money." Sarah looked confused. "How? We don't have any assets worth that much." I walked to my desk and pulled out another folder, one they'd never seen before. "Actually," I said, laying it on the table, "you do. You just don't know it yet." I spread the papers across the coffee table: property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements from accounts they didn't recognize. "When your father died, Sarah," I said softly, "he left specific instructions for his estate that I never fully explained to you." Sarah picked up one of the papers, her hands trembling. "This is a deed to property in Sedona." "I've never heard of this address." I nodded. "Your father bought that land 30 years ago as an investment. It's worth about $200,000 now." I pointed to another document. "This is his pension fund. It's been earning interest for 6 years. And this, I touched the third file, is a trust fund he set up for you when you were born. Marcus stared at the papers as if they were written in another language. Helen, what are you saying? I sat back down, feeling the weight of years of secrecy lifting from my shoulders. I'm saying that David was far more financially sophisticated than anyone realized. He didn't just leave me comfortable, he made sure Sarah would be, too. When she was mature enough to handle the responsibility, Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. How much? I glanced at the most recent statements. Your inheritance, which I've been managing since your father's death, is worth approximately $180,000. The number seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Combined with selling the Sedona property, I said quietly, you'll have enough to make full restitution and still have money left over. Sarah's face twisted with confusion and anger. But why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me struggle, let us worry about money when there was this whole inheritance waiting? I met her eyes steadily. Because over the years, I started to see changes in your attitude about money and what you thought you were entitled to. Your father made me promise not to give you access to it until you'd learned the value of money, until you respected other people's financial boundaries. And after watching how you've handled my accounts these past 3 years, I said, my voice calm but firm, I know now that he was right to be concerned. Marcus was doing calculations in his head. So we can pay back the money and avoid prison, he said finally. I nodded. You can make restitution, probably negotiate plea deals that keep you out of significant jail time, and start your lives over with a better understanding of consequences. Sarah was staring at the inheritance documents like she thought they might disappear. But Mom, if I had this money, why did we spend years taking from your accounts? That was the question I'd been waiting for. Because it was easier to take from me than to wait for what was rightfully yours, I said quietly. Because you assumed I was too old, too sick, or too grateful to notice or to care. I gathered up the papers, holding Sarah's financial future in my hands. Your inheritance comes with conditions now. Conditions your father never anticipated but that have become necessary. Sarah and Marcus exchanged uneasy looks. What conditions? Sarah asked. First, I said, complete restitution to my accounts within 30 days. Second, formal letters of apology acknowledging that you stole from me, not borrowed. Third, you'll attend financial counseling to learn how to manage money responsibly. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And fourth, you will never have access to my personal accounts again, ever. Marcus nodded quickly. Those seem reasonable, Helen. We're grateful for this chance to make things right. But Sarah wasn't looking grateful. There was something else in her eyes, something calculating. And if we refuse these conditions? She asked quietly. If we decide to take our chances with the federal charges? I smiled, recognizing that old rebellious streak of hers surfacing once again. Then you go to prison, I said calmly. And your inheritance goes to the Phoenix Children's Hospital in your name. Either way, you won't be spending my money anymore. The room went still as they absorbed the reality of their situation. They could accept help with strings attached or face federal charges with their pride intact. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was still more than they'd given me at that dealership. We accept, Marcus said at last. Sarah nodded reluctantly. We'll do whatever it takes. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Good, then we'll start the restitution process tomorrow. Tonight, I'm taking my new Porsche out for dinner to celebrate my recovery. As I picked up my purse and keys, Sarah called after me. Moms, are we going to be okay? Our relationship, I mean? I paused at the front door and turned back to look at her and Marcus. They looked young, scared, and for the first time since all this began, genuinely sorry, Sarah. I said softly. For the first time in 3 years, we have a chance to build a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. Whether we're okay or not depends on whether you can finally learn to see me as your mother, instead of your bank account. As I drove away in my Porsche, windows down and music up, I thought about the strange journey from victim to victor. It had started with a casual betrayal at a car dealership, and ended with a family that might finally understand the difference between love and exploitation. Sarah and Marcus had learned that stealing from family wasn't consequence-free, and I'd learned that sometimes the people who love you most are the very ones who respect you the least. But most importantly, I'd learned that cancer might have tried to kill me, but I was far too stubborn to die before I finished teaching the people I loved how to treat me properly. The desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as I drove toward my favorite restaurant, a cancer survivor in a silver Porsche. Finally free to spend my own money on my own happiness, and if that wasn't worth celebrating, nothing was. 3 months later, Sarah and Marcus had completed their restitution, attended financial counseling, and rebuilt their relationship with money and with me. The federal charges were reduced to misdemeanors with community service. And they were slowly earning back my trust through actions. Not words, but that's another story entirely. This one ends with a simple truth: never underestimate a woman who's survived cancer, raised children, and finally learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just exploitation dressed up in prettier packaging. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.